a SEPTA route deep dive.
Hey, nice to meet you. I'm Jackson. My YouTube channel is mostly for music, but if there's one thing I like that isn't music, it's transit, and YouTube videos seem to be the in method of disseminating transit knowledge these days. So, welcome to a very tentative, low-budget, but hopefully informative foray into transit-related content. I'm going to start by diving into the history of the SEPTA bus route that's near and dear to my heart because I live near it and hear it going by my living room at intervals all day. It taunts me. So, without further ado, presenting the history of a South Philly stalwart, a Broad Street Line feeder route, a former trolley bus and battery bus route, but now just a humble but useful 3.4-mile diesel bus route that's a fixture of Tasker and Morris streets in South Philly. The route detoured. Well, that head sign is supposed to say 29, but you get my drift. The streetcar trackage that's the precursor of today's Route 29 dates from the late 19th century. Before being unified into one streetcar system, Philadelphia was crisscrossed by streetcar lines built by various private companies. Most of these early streetcar lines used horsepower, but beginning in the 1880s, some began to experiment with electrification. Initially, the method of choice for electrifying trolleys was cables, like the ones famously operated in San Francisco. But in 1892, the first trolley pole-operated line opened in Philadelphia on Bainbridge and Catherine Streets in South Philly. This trackage would later become part of the now defunct Route 63 streetcar. We're not sure exactly which one of all those private companies first operated the trackage on Tasker and Morris Streets that evolved into the now funked 29. I feel like that info is probably out there somewhere, so if you know where I can find it, let me know. Though I guess I've already made the video, so I'm not sure how useful it would be. In 1895, 66 of these private companies were merged to create the Union Traction Company, which was one unified transit system. In 1902, the Union Traction Company was leased by Philadelphia Rapid Transit Company, a new organization that put its branding on the streetcar lines and cross-promoted them with other modes of transit in Philadelphia, like the Market-Frankford line, which the PRT began construction of in 1903. So, what did this mean for the trolleys on Tasker and Morris Streets? The UTC and PRT linked several formerly disparate streetcar lines around Philadelphia to create L-shaped routes that those in the biz would call one-seat rides. As seen in this map from 1895, and even more clearly in this map from 1911, the line on Tasker and Morris was linked with a north-south line running on 23rd and 22nd Streets, where today's 7 bus runs, to create a route that appears to have been numbered the 39. In 1913, the PRT split the two legs of the 39 into two separate routes. The Tasker-Morris portion was renumbered the 29, and the vertical portion on 22nd and 23rd became the 7.
Now it's a streetcar route, number the 29.
This 1914 PRT map shows that the 29 took a few years to achieve its ultimate routing. For a few years, it deviated to 22nd and Snyder, then turned back north onto 23rd, then continued to Water Street on Morris like it does today. By the way, this 1914 trip wouldn't be possible with today's street alignments. After World War II, several streets that ran through or near the Gray's Ferry neighborhood of Philadelphia had their directions reversed, including both South 22nd and 23rd Streets. By the time of the next map we have, which is dated 1923, the route has been simplified even more. It goes west on Tasker, lays over in the middle of the street at 28th and Tasker, then loops right back around and goes eastbound on Morris to Water Street. What did a ride on the 29 look like during its streetcar days? It went pretty quickly. That's less than 3 miles from Water Street to 28th Street. The 29 wasn't the flagship route of the PRT, being hidden away in quiet South Philly, and so, for most of its life as a rail route, the 29 used near-side trolley cars, part of an order of 1,500 trolleys built between 1911 and 1913. Pretty interestingly, the cars only had one door, in the front of the car, where both the driver and motormen were stationed. Peter Witt, a guy from Cleveland who designed the now famous trolley configuration with a front and middle door, was years away from that innovation. Philadelphia's near sides had wooden seats, which I imagine were pretty bumpy, and they were neither air-conditioned in the summer nor heated in the winter. As they aged, they were prone to derailments, as is seen in this alarming-looking 1925 photo taken somewhere on Morris Street. In 1938, the PRT expanded their Broad Street subway line into South Philly, opening 3 new stations: Ellsworth Federal, Tasker Morris, and Snyder. Each of these stations was placed to coincide with the existing streetcar line, which could serve as a feeder to the subway. Respectively, that's the 64, 29, and the 79 and 81. 2 years later, the PRT was merged with several other independent transportation corporations around the city to form the Philadelphia Transportation Company, or PTC, the immediate predecessor of SEPTA. The PTC didn't rock the boat right away, since there was a war going on and all. But after World War II, the PTC took stock of a national trend towards Bustitution of streetcars. In the post-war climate of extravagance and optimism, vehicles where tires were seen as an expression of freedom and liberty and America, and streetcar lines that ran on rails represented inflexibility and also inconvenience when street blockages happened. In the late 1940s, the PTC released plans to convert over 40 streetcar lines to buses, and that ended up happening pretty much wholesale in the mid-50s. As it turned out, this Bustitution came early to the 29. In 1947, Tasker and Morris streets were repaved, and the PTC ran a substitution bus line on Moore and Dickinson Streets. I'm not really sure how that would have worked, since Moore Street isn't a straight shot, but I'm just going to take the author of that one book's word for it. During that process, the PTC ran on the line what are, so far, the only double-decker buses Philly Local Transit has ever used. Built in 1925 by the Yellow Coach Company, later renamed GMC. These double-deck buses ran on a combination of gas and electric power and were usually used on the A, C, and D bus routes until all being retired in 1948. When the repaving was finished, Philly's Public Works Department had decided not to bother to re-embed the rails into the pavement. And before we get to the exciting part, a side note. Most of the rail was pried up and removed, but a few blocks of rail remained. As seen in this 1954 track map, a few blocks of trackage were left in place on Morris between 18th and Broad, and on Tasker between 12th and 10th. I don't really get why, because these tracks weren't connected to anything. That's Philly for you. Side note, earlier in 2022, Tasker Street was repaved, and during that process, I figured out that at least one segment of Route 29 rail, between 10th and 11th, still lurks under layers of pavement. If you're watching this video, I'm sure you'd agree that's pretty cool.
This is the big transit nerd moment of excitement.
Anyway, here comes the big transit nerd moment of excitement. The PTC loved buses, but also enjoyed the efficiency of electric power, so they decided to institute a happy medium on the 29 following the repaving. Trackless trolleys, otherwise known as trolley buses. Same thing. Trackless trolleys weren't new to Philadelphia. As early as 1923, the PRT had introduced them to the Route 80, which ran on Oregon Avenue in South Philly, just as an experiment. In 1941, the PTC continued the experiment, converting streetcar Route 61, which ran on Ridge Avenue from Manayunk into Center City, to trolley buses as well. In December of 1947, the 29 became Philadelphia's third trackless trolley route, and it briefly became a showplace of Philly's transit operations by using brand new TC-44 trolley buses, manufactured by Brill, based in Philadelphia, in 1947. These vehicles would serve until the early 1980s, and they were never changed from their original green and cream colored PTC livery. Beginning in 1961, when the Route 79 on Snyder Avenue was also converted to a trackless route, the Brill trolley buses served that route as well. Freed from the constraints of tracks, the PTC expanded the 29 in 1948 for the first time in over 30 years. They expanded it on its western end to an off-street loop at 33rd and Dickinson Streets. Notice how Morris Street gets bendy toward its western end. That's because of the Tasker Homes, which opened in 1937 and were one of the Philadelphia Housing Authority's first attempts at a housing project. If you look at maps from the 50s and 60s, you don't see much change with the 29 after that expansion. Even after 1968, when the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transit Authority, or SEPTA, took over. You'll see on maps that the 29 is denoted in blue as opposed to red for bus routes, because the map makers are denoting that the route uses electric power. In 1981, SEPTA ordered a new fleet of trackless trolleys for the 29. These were built by AM General and were limited editions. Philly ordered 110 of them, and Seattle ordered 109, and that was all they manufactured. Several problems with these trolley buses happened early on, such as the vehicles not being grounded properly and operators getting electrocuted when raising the poles to the wire. But after those issues were sorted out, the AM General trolley buses replaced the Brills on the 29. In 2003, after decades of blight and declining fortunes, the Philadelphia Housing Authority began a lengthy project to demolish the Tasker homes and replace them with new residences. And due once again to a road detour, SEPTA suspended trolley bus service on the 29 in February 2003. SEPTA had already suspended the 3 North Philly trolleybus routes, the 59, 66, and 75, the previous summer, and in September 2003, it also suspended the 79, meaning no trolleybuses were left operating in Philly. SEPTA said that was temporary, but, As seen in this 2005 map, the detour used Dickinson Street instead of Morris Street, west of 25th Street. And since this change was enshrined in a schedule, it was evidently considered semi-permanent. Also, as shown in this 2006 capture from the Wayback Machine, SEPTA evidently considered the 29 to still be a trackless route at that point. However, in October of that year, the then very diesel-oriented SEPTA board voted to order new trolleybuses, only for the 3 North Philly routes. This effectively closed off the possibility of returning the 29 and 79 to trolleybus service, and for the moment, that put the matter to rest.
Now it's just a diesel bus, a diesel bus.
It took until 2007 for SEPTA to actually update the 29 on their website to signify it being a regular bus route. But is that surprising? In 2006, the PHA's new housing project, the Grays Ferry Estates, opened, and Morris Street went back to its original, non-bendy orientation, which meant that the 29 could resume service as normal. True to form, it took a while for SEPTA to make this change on its maps. One other change to the route did appear on SEPTA's maps in early 2004. Once again, freed by the constraints of wires, SEPTA extended Route 29 on its east end, the route's first extension in over 50 years. This extension took the 29 to the Pier 70 shopping center on Columbus Boulevard in what was once known as South Philly's Delivery District. Around the same time, SEPTA also extended routes 7, 25, and 64 to the same spot in order to create transfer opportunities. This is the state in which the 29 exists today. Meanwhile, around 2017, SEPTA removed the trolleybus wire from Tasker and Morris Streets, although it left the vast majority of the poles up, which still survive in fairly good condition. A few other relics of the past remain, like these telltale pairs of wire frogs at 11th and 12th Streets where the 29 intersected with the 23 trolley, whose wires still remain today. In 2017, there was one more surprise in store for the 29, which was subject to special treatment because of its uniquely short length as well as, I presume, its legacy of electrification in the recent past. SEPTA decided to experiment with battery buses for the first time and chose South Philly routes 29 and 79 for the pilot. It purchased 25 all-electric Catalyst buses from Proterra, a company based in Burlingame, California, and put them all into service on the 29 and 79. They debuted in early 2019 on the 2 routes, and early impressions were positive. Blogger Miles in Transit was delighted by the bus's rear windows, a rare sighting on SEPTA vehicles, and YouTuber Dash Transit, whose videos I'm using here, posted several clips of the Proterra in service, raving about the quality of the ride. Unfortunately, the Proterras had integral functionality issues. While they were built to last 350 miles between charges, Philly's bitterly cold winters caused that mileage to decrease to just 150 miles between charges, making them much less efficient and creating scheduling issues. In addition, the weight of the batteries produced alarming cracks in the bus's frames. In February 2020, just a year after they entered service, SEPTA sidelined the buses. Transit fans began to refer to these Proterra buses not so affectionately as potatoes. Today, 29 runs using a representative sample of SEPTA's new Flyer bus fleet, including D40LFs, D40LFRs, and Excelsiors. A few weeks ago, I even got a John Morgan bus on there. I also swear I've seen DE40LFs on there before, but in my recent couple weeks of shooting this video, I didn't run into one. The 29 isn't the most frequent route in the city, about every 10 minutes during rush hour, 20 minutes weekdays during midday, and every half hour nights and weekends. But it gets the job done. It remains a pretty reliable way to get across South Philly and to make connections with a variety of north-south routes. It's also reassuring to know that SEPTA still wants to explore electrification options for the 29, even if the potatoes decidedly weren't the way to go. While the 29 isn't particularly special these days, it easily could be, and I'm excited to see what SEPTA comes up with for future energy-efficient options. It's fun to ride the 29, which navigates through 2 narrow South Philly streets with parked cars on both sides, a setting that reinforces the integrally local nature of the 29. And even as a regular, and short to boot, diesel bus route, the 29 retains a crucial importance in Philly's transit network as a great way for me to get to Target. Lunchables bus.